Tonight, secrets, spies, and useful idiots.
In early January, it was reported by CNN that the FBI briefed Donald Trump and briefed President Obama on a list of allegations against Donald Trump and his campaign concerning Russia. That initial report from CNN didn't exactly say what these allegations were, but within 24 hours, BuzzFeed News published the dossier, this whole 35-page dossier.
The most incendiary claim in the Steele Dossier was, of course, that a foreign adversary, Russia, has dirt on the President of the United States, exposing the president to blackmail. Now it turns out there was a whole vault full of dirt on Donald J. Trump.
Donald Trump didn't seem to care much about Russian election meddling, but cared a lot about Russian prostitutes.
In November last year, NBC News reported that Trump's longtime bodyguard Keith Schiller testified to Congress that on the day of their arrival in Moscow, a Russian offered to send 5 women to Trump's Moscow hotel room. Schiller told members of the House Intelligence Committee that he'd laughed at the offer and said, "We don't do that type of stuff." According to Keith Schiller, he and Trump laughed about the offer on their way back to the hotel room that night. He then testified that he stood outside Trump's hotel room for a while and then he went to bed. One source telling NBC News, Schiller testified that he couldn't say for sure what happened during the remainder of the night. How should we think about this revelation?
Trump goes into a hotel in Russia, the same room that the Obama stayed in, according to the dossier, and he has 2 Russian prostitutes pee on the bed.
His personal bodyguard who stood outside that hotel room, he knew Mr. Trump was in there before he was the president in 2013. And this is a really critical time because it's not just part of the dossier, which is also important, but it's the beginning of the Trump-Russia relationship. And this matters when you're trying to look at the entire investigation and zoom out on the relationship between this president and anything what the Russians would call compromat that they could then hang over the president. He has wanted to pick every piece of this dossier apart and say it is uncorroborated. But people in the intelligence community will tell you that there can be pieces of raw information that are correct and pieces that are incorrect. And in this case, they have evidence to believe that what Mr. Trump is saying, what he told Comey, what President Trump is saying to Comey, that his head never hit a pillow that night, is incorrect, that in fact he was there, which of course leads us to wonder, was this other more salacious detail correct? And what other parts of this overall dossier, which would be incredibly damning for Trump and his campaign and his administration, might also be correct? It really sort of undermines this linchpin that Trump has built around to try to de-obstruct the Mueller investigation. It takes away that alibi, Rachel.
Mr. Comey, after leaving government, went public with that story in his book and on his book press tour.
The allegation was that he had been involved with prostitutes in a hotel in Moscow in 2013 during a visit for the Miss Universe pageant. I'm about to talk to him about allegations that he was involved with prostitutes in Moscow and that the Russians taped it and have leverage over him. I did not go into the business about people peeing on each other. And he interrupted, started talking about it. Do I look like a guy who needs hookers? I didn't answer that, and then I just moved on. But I don't know whether the current president of the United States was with prostitutes peeing on each other in Moscow in 2013. It's possible, but I don't know. It was raw intelligence, so a series of reports from a credible person with a reliable track record and a known, experienced, and source network in Russia. And so it was something to be taken seriously.
It's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen.
The White House has attacked Comey, calling him a liar. But a new ABC News poll out this morning suggests Americans 48 to 32% find James Comey more believable than the president.
You have known Christopher Steele for years.
While I was at the State Department, he provided me some 120 documents about Russia and Ukraine. These documents were well received by the people who were doing Russia full-time within the Department of State, and that's why I continue to provide them. He did it because he felt it was information the United States government should have. Similarly, when he developed the information relating to 2016 and Russia's assault on our democracy and interference in our elections, he felt it was important that the U.S. government be aware of it. I did too.
His credibility is not in doubt as far as I'm concerned. This isn't just gossip. This information smacks
It sounds very real to people who've been there. This is exactly how the Russians operate.
The Kremlin's puppet master now has America dancing to his discordant tune. He couldn't have planned it better.
Where do we stand on the investigation into finding out whether the really troubling contents of that so-called dossier may be true?
Well, there's been, I think, an effort by some to discredit the firm Fusion GPS or discredit Mr. Steele. And as you say, Mr. Steele has a very good reputation.
The FBI used a dossier of allegations of Russian ties to Donald Trump's campaign as part of the justification to get approval to secretly monitor Trump associate Carter Page.
What more can you tell us about that?
As we learned last month, Comey, the FBI director, had initiated a counterintelligence investigation in July. And based on our reporting and interviews with multiple officials, law enforcement and otherwise, what the FBI did was obtain a FISA warrant to basically monitor the communications of Carter Page, who had been identified by Trump in March as one of his foreign policy advisors. And from there, that warrant, which typically lasts 90 days, was renewed at least once, if not multiple times.
And in order to do that, one would assume that there must be some information in order for them. There's a reason for them to continue to renew it, because if no information was found, you would assume that they wouldn't continue to renew the warrant.
Yeah, certainly they had to establish what's known as probable cause.
Okay.
The threshold is rather high to make that case, to target an American. They basically went and sought a FISA judge concurrence. Maybe they did hear something that the judge thought was interesting and warranted.
This is part of a concerted Russian influence operation that never stopped.
Despite what a 400-plus page FBI report suggests, former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page says he is not an agent for Russia.
The president wasting no time, though, to hammer the FBI over this, claiming that DOJ misled courts in the Russia investigation by using the controversial Steele dossier as a factor for the surveillance of Page.
Former Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, told the House Intelligence Committee that initial warrant would not have been issued without the Steele dossier.
Well, I mean, saying the dossier is fake news doesn't make it fake news.
A major walkback from the Washington Post, a paper correcting and retracting large portions of two articles based on the now discredited Steele dossier. A Post media reporter explaining that the piece, quote, identified a Belarusian American businessman as the key source of the Steele dossier, a collection of largely unverified reports that claimed the Russian government had compromising information about then candidate Donald Trump.
The report was undertaken by Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Justice Department.
The Inspector General pulled back the curtain on how Steele had gathered his information. It doesn't name Steele's collector, but the report does describe some of his methods. And we'd later learn he was not someone well placed in the Kremlin, but an analyst in Washington.
The big lie of Russia collusion keeps on unraveling.
Igor Danchenko is accused of lying to the FBI, and he's facing felony charges. He's a researcher who was a key source of salacious rumors and claims about Donald Trump in the infamous Steele dossier. That dossier helped fuel the FBI's investigation into suspected ties between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Special counsel John Durham charging him with 5 counts of lying to the FBI, the third indictment in John Durham's probe.
Until now, Hillary Clinton and her campaign team would not admit any connection to the Trump dossier. Former Clinton campaign spokesperson Brian Fallon said the Democrats did nothing wrong.
We now know that the Democrats started the hoax, the Democrats paid for the dossier, and now we know the Democrats put the lies in the dossier.
I don't think it really adds much value to know who paid for it necessarily.
He's a sack of shifts.
There's pretty much nobody at this point who denies any longer that the Steele dossier is a fraud. Like, you have Rachel Maddow trying to salvage the last tatters of her reputation and kind of internet crazies and that like weird, obsessive Russiagate world that still lingers. But nobody really in media is trying to dispute any longer the obvious truth, which is that the Steele dossier was a fraud.
Everybody is running from the hills or for the hills
away from this dossier, which was complete nonsense and should have been seen as complete nonsense just on its face when we first learned about it.
This entire narrative that got constructed on the back of the Steele dossier is now being exposed as a gigantic sham.
Because that one false manufactured story guided nearly everything the media focused on for over 4 years. And when we made fun of it, the media made fun of us, like we were in denial, when in fact it was them all along. So we need to settle a score and then run that score up like the Harlem Globetrotters playing against the Little Sisters of the Poor. So first, a recap. The Steele dossier was an anti-Trump conspiracy theory funded by the Clinton campaign. It became the #1 all things Russian smear buffet. All it needed was Boris, Natasha, and a bowl filled with poisoned borscht.
The dossier has been corroborated by the intelligence community.
The dossier, in fact, is far from bogus.
I think we're going to actually have to stop calling it the infamous dossier. Increasingly, it's the accurate dossier.
The famous dossier, which is getting a lot more credibility now.
The Republican claim today was that the dossier has been increasingly discredited. That's not true in terms of the public record about the dossier. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
They have so much egg on their face, their eyeballs need Lipitor.
You remember Dan Rathergate, right? It's 2004. Rather and producer Mary Mapes had put out a false report on 60 Minutes about George W. Bush's National Guard service just days before a tight election. And after that story was decided to be was decidedly proven to be a crock, CBS conducts a thorough investigation, and Rather's fired along with his producer and Mapes. No such investigation here, Will, is going to be conducted by any news organizations here because there are no real standards anymore, no accountability. And again, the damage was done, means to an end. 3 years of a presidency were consumed by this tall tale conjured up by the Clinton administration.
Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky tweeted out last night this shocking claim. Breaking, a high-level source tells me it was John Brennan who insisted that the unverified and fake Steele dossier be included in the intel report. Brennan should be asked to testify under oath in front of Congress as soon as possible.
Senator Rand Paul joins us now to explain. Senator Paul, what more can you tell us about the lead you got?
Well, my source tells me that the intelligence community, Obama's intelligence community, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, they were frustrated because they had this Russian dossier, but nobody believed it was real. It wasn't verifiable. They couldn't get anything of it. So they sent spies into the Trump campaign. They tried to entrap Trump officials to admit they were working with Russia. That wasn't working. And so they were frustrated, but they wanted to somehow get this information out, this Russian dossier, that even the media wasn't publishing. Nobody would publish it because it was so scandalous, unverifiable, and likely fiction. So finally they decided, well, what we have to do is attach this dossier, this fake dossier, to an intelligence report. So the president receives these intelligence reports, and they're given directly to the president. Well, what they do is they staple to the report the Russian dossier. So now Obama's officially seeing it, and then also it's given to Trump at this point. But realize that this is a big circle. They'd had the dossier for months and months. So when John McCain is given the dossier, it's given to him by people who may have leaked it from our government to John McCain, so John McCain can give it back to the FBI. I mean, it's a crazy circle, all trying to justify something that wasn't true, but extraordinary power of these people and extraordinary corruption. And they almost brought, they tried to bring down a sitting president. This shouldn't happen to anybody. And when President Trump spoke to us this week, he said he doesn't want it to happen to any future presidents, Republican or Democrat, that the intelligence agencies use all of their power of surveillance to actually try to bring down a sitting president.
This led, I think, directly to the first impeachment. This unsettled the Republic in a way that was very profound.
We have never been torn apart as a country as we were by this Russia collusion delusion.
You see the prosecutor in the Russia collusion case making crap up, and it kind of deflates you because these were the building blocks of our republic. If you can't trust the state to prosecute honestly, if you can't trust the Justice Department to investigate honestly, I mean, what do we have?
The truth is, the Steele dossier, as everyone knows, is what gave birth to the entire climate in which Robert Mueller was appointed, in which all of these journalistic investigations proceeded, that gave credibility to this incredibly demented and, as we know, false idea that the Kremlin had blackmail leverage over Donald Trump and was using it to infiltrate and control the levers of the United States and U.S. power. That was the prevailing primary narrative for 3 or 4 years that came from the mainstream part of the media, and that is what is being exposed, not just this one document.